Hello and welcome to our presentation on inherent language. We would like you to meet a girl called Emma. She is like any other child except for one little difference. Can you guess what it is? Her parents have different languages, and so they have spoken Danish and Spanish to her since even before she was born. Her mother is Danish, so she and Emma speak Danish to each other. Her father comes from Spain, so he usually speaks Spanish to her. Most of the time when the family is together, their main language is Danish, but they sometimes switch and mix. It usually depends on the situation and the context. They are very flexible, as both parents understand the languages of the other. Since they all know each other's codes, it doesn't matter if someone switches. They still usually understand each other. The main thing is that communication works. Emma was born in Austria, where the national language is German. So she also speaks German because she's at school in Austria, and on the playground when she meets her friends, they all speak German to each other. When she's at home and explores the online world, she does that in English, as most of the content is available in English. Emma can speak all her languages at more or less the same level. The hardest question anyone can ask Emma is, "Tell me, what is your mother tongue?"
Danish, I guess, but my other languages are very important to me too. I don't have a favorite. I am attached to each one emotionally, and they are all an equal part of my life.
Emma, you don't have to worry about that anymore. We have a new term you could call the languages that you call your own. It is inherent language, or short, iLanguage. So what exactly do we mean by inherent language? Well, an inherent language is a language you can speak so well that it is so much a part of you that you can use it almost instinctively, just like a reflex.
Cool! Then I have 4.
For all the people out there who, like Emma, speak several languages and don't really know how to describe their languages or which one to choose as their mother tongue, we have a solution. We want to introduce you to iLanguage and tell you a little bit about why it is a much better way of talking about your languages and identity. We have probably all heard and used the terms mother tongue or native language or something similar at one point or another in our lives. The only thing we can say with some degree of certainty is that everyone has their own definition of what they mean based on personal experience and circumstance. Let's keep it simple and stick to a very common definition. Mother tongue is the language you were brought up in. It is the language you spoke to your parents at home. This definition is fine for some people, but for many, it is a lot more complicated than that. If we talk about mother tongue, do we only mean the mother's language? What about the father? Doesn't he count? What happens if your parents have 2 different languages? What if you were born in a country that neither of your parents are native of? What if you feel a language is your mother tongue even though it doesn't meet any of the general criteria? What about a foreign language? The concept of foreignness is one with so many connotations, and many of which are not necessarily positive. Although some languages are perceived as desirable, there are unfortunately still a lot of stereotypes out there about others. This language prestige can lead to prejudice and negative attitudes towards foreigners. This also raises questions about language and identity. Language forms our thinking and therefore our identity, but it is not only about our self-perception, it is also about external perception and how that shapes us. If our languages are deemed desirable, we may have a more positive self-perception than if our languages are not seen as such. Attitudes towards ourselves and others are what shape a community's coherence. In order to provide a more suitable and comprehensive term for the languages a multilingual person speaks, Dr. Koblitz suggests the term inherent language, or short, iLanguage. Inherent comes from the Latin word inherere, which refers to an element that is an essential part of a being or an object. What is iLanguage and what makes it iLanguage is a term to describe one or more languages spoken by an individual and which are seen as part of their identity. They come to mind first, depending on context and conversational partner. They can be, but don't have to be, equal to each other. So, what does that mean in detail? It means that you are able to express yourself fluently and communicate with other monolinguals. The method of acquisition is irrelevant, as is the phase of life the language was acquired in. You can think in said language. This means you can express yourself without having to translate in your head. You are able to hold conversations about various topics and are able to substitute missing vocabulary in order to explain precisely what you mean. An inherent language can be either acquired or be part of the linguistic inheritance, and speakers feel at home in it either way. It is something they own and is a part of them at the same time. It is inherent. Each language has its functionality in interpersonal relationships, in different phases of life, in professional or academic settings, etc. Think about it. How many different settings do you have where you use a different language? So why do we need iLanguage? In our society, more and more often people have several languages that correspond to a quality of a mother tongue, but either were not acquired from the mother or do not meet the definition of one. These languages would not be classified as foreign languages, though, since they are already internalized. And that is the problem. Why can't an individual that is acquiring a language call and perceive it as their own? It seems illogical to refer to a language you are learning as foreign, since that would imply that you would never be able to call it your own. If we applied the principle of mi casa is su casa, which is Spanish for my home is your home, to language learning, then maybe more people would feel at home when learning another language and achieve greater and, more importantly, faster success. Basically, it's gotta feel good. That's why we think there is a need to rethink the notion of mother tongue and give people the impetus to think about their multilingualism and become aware of the role their languages have within their own language repertoire. If we use the term iLanguage to identify the languages we own, it could positively influence attitudes towards multilingualism, strengthen identities in a beneficial way, and hopefully eliminate language prestige. A good example for this is how the European Union is trying to promote a European identity, and as part of its language policy proposes that every European citizen should know 2 languages in addition to his or her mother tongue. You can visit the website below. It's in English, but you can find the language options on the top of the website. In Austria, the mindset is still that you are either Austrian or a foreigner. In other countries like Canada and the US, people are proud to include their diverse backgrounds by calling themselves Franco-Canadian, Greco-Canadian, Afro-American, German-American, etc. We definitely encourage you to feel 100% of everything that you are and not just half and half. The term inherent language, or iLanguage, originated as a result of Carola Koblitz's research in 2017, where she wanted to observe how 2 bilingual children acquired a 3rd language, mainly through audiovisual media. This unconventional way of learning a language led to the realization that the existing terms are too exclusionary. The children learned English so well and so fast that people took them for native speakers and were surprised how they had mastered it so perfectly without any apparent familial relation to the language. As the children grew more conscious, they realized that their language skills also had an effect on their identity formation. Where did English fit in, and what kind of space did it occupy next to their other languages, which were German and Spanish? When the children were little, they didn't even know what Spanish or German was. For example, when someone asked them, "Tell me something in Spanish," they would ask, "Like Daddy? Like Mommy? Or like Dora and Diego?" There are many bicultural families where the interaction of several languages is the most natural thing in the world. But when it comes to defining what role each of those languages plays in our lives or in the lives of our children, that is when the differences of opinion begin. That is why defining languages as inherent could help multicultural families in the formation of their identity and the integration of the different cultures they have. It encourages a positive self-perception and how they present themselves to the outside world. On one occasion, a father of polyglot children commented,
"Somehow it bothers me that my children, being my own flesh and blood, have a different mother tongue than my own. Of course, I'm proud of the fact that they speak several languages, but when it comes to the emotional side, these labels simply bother me."
iLanguage is what everyone can share, even if the speakers are not at the same level. What is important is that they communicate, and communication is best when it happens fast and effectively. That is why we would like to introduce you to the lightning principle. No matter where we come from or where we feel we belong, or in what language we communicate, interpersonal communication will always obey the lightning principle. This principle is a metaphor that illustrates how communication always seeks, like the lightning phenomenon, the path of least resistance. This means it seeks out the most effective and therefore the fastest path. These forms of translingual mixing and borrowing could be interpreted as code mixing, yet there are a variety of different reasons that lead to the use of these shortcuts, and we also call them the lightning principle. For people who speak several languages, it is common to use mixtures and borrowings when speaking to individuals who are known to speak the same set of languages. To an outsider, they can make no sense and be incomprehensible, just like an insider joke. The mixing of languages used to be perceived as a mistake, for example, a lack of consequence, especially by parents when educating their children in a multilingual environment. Today we know that it is an additional strategy which multilingual people develop. Ofelia Garcia, in her studies on translanguaging, underlines how it is illogical to require a multilingual child to act as a monolingual, because when communicating, a multilingual person will make use of all the tools available to them to help them reach their destination by the quickest and most effective way. Sometimes a person resorts to mixing or borrowing from another language if they can't think of a word in the language they are currently speaking. It's kind of like a missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle. If the speakers share the same languages, they will borrow the word from another of their common languages in order to keep the communication uninterrupted and effective. The speaker's awareness of the partner's language repertoire determines whether they can borrow words to speed up communication or not. The lightning principle applies in any case, as the end goal of communication is to get the message across in the most effective way. It has probably happened to all of us at some point that we couldn't remember a certain word. It even happens to us when we act in a monolingual way, so we replace the word that does not occur to us with fillers such as the thing, that, the thingamajig, etc. When we have several languages at our disposal to communicate with someone and we cannot think of the word we're looking for, we tend to mix and borrow from another language. This is to keep the communication afloat and without interference. In other words, fast and effective. Another interesting phenomenon Koblitz noticed during her observation was that the children applied what she later coined as the Wald-Forest principle. Context-bound expressions are words that the individual experiences in strong association within a context. These words make such a strong emotional impression on the language learner that the context of the word will stay with them for a very long time. They will use the word in certain contextual situations in the language it was first encountered, even if the language they are speaking momentarily is a different one. This may seem incoherent and incomprehensible to people who are not familiar with these languages or translingual mixtures. Expressions according to the Wald-Forest principle are concepts that are learned in a given situation. For example, The children in Koblitz's 2017 study used English when playing. Hence, English was the language chosen to describe magical concepts and refer to the world of fantasy in general. When they meant a forest in nature, in one of their other languages, they would use the appropriate word. However, even if they were speaking Spanish or German, they would use the word forest if they wanted to refer to a forest as something magical, where animals talk and where a witch or a fairy may live. Hence the name of this principle. Multilingualism is as unique as the people who it is inherent to. It is something flexible, variable, and follows certain patterns depending on the speaker, the situation, the environment, and so on. It always obeys the lightning principle in order to maintain fast, effective, and efficient communication. Human beings communicate with all their languages, which are part of their identity and part of them. Whatever one chooses to call their languages, or whatever others want to define them as, they are always an inherent part of them. So why not just call them what they are, inherent languages? Thank you very much for your attention. We're looking forward to the upcoming discussion and to find out more about your iLanguages and experiences. Goodbye.